Hello and welcome to episode 219 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. We have been expanding our guest pool on the show in recent months, and today we have someone exciting joining us. Peter Moore is not only a travel writer, but he took a cartooning course later in life, and now he is also a travel cartoonist. As I enter a new phase of my life, I always love getting reminders that it's never too late to change course or add new interest to your life. We only have so much time on this planet, so it's important to try to capture every moment and try everything you want to try. As many of you know, my wife Courtney and I have moved away from Florida. This has been in the works for a few years, but we were finally in a position where we can make it happen from a financial and planning standpoint. While this will certainly change the frequency with which I will be in the parks, I have saved up a lot of park-related content to make sure that there are still reasons to visit the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Make sure you are subscribed and check out any videos that you may have missed. I will also be adding different types of travel content as I am now in close proximity to some of the greatest places in the world to visit. With all of that in mind, I have already had a ton of conversations with my regular co-hosts Maz and Sarah, and we will continue to talk theme parks about 90% of the time on the podcast. Specifically, we will talk about Disney and Universal a ton. We are planning a big month in May as we lead up to the opening of Universal's Epic Universe. I am also planning a return trip to Walt Disney World in late September to coincide with my annual pass expiring. There are plenty of reasons to continue to follow us. This upcoming weekend, I'll be airing a 3-video series covering the last day Courtney and I spent at Walt Disney World before we headed back up north. We hit all 4 WDW theme parks and tried to do some of our absolute favorite things one last time before we would say goodbye for a little while. We were surprised by some cast members and had a really great time. Those videos will start on Saturday and run through Monday. Right now, let's get started with today's conversation. Thanks for being here, Peter.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, Peter, I like to talk about travel. I've been doing it on the podcast for over 4 years now. And we started off talking a lot about theme parks and some of that type of travel. But as I have gotten more outdoors over the past few years, we've started to incorporate more hiking and more outdoor travel on the podcast periodically. And you do something that I find very interesting because I love when people take other interests and merge them with their travel. And you like to hike, but you also are an illustrator. You also are a cartoonist. So why don't you talk about how you use that talent to enhance your traveling experiences?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. It took me a long time to realize this in life that actually I was an artist and a cartoonist. I spent most of my career working as a magazine editor for Playboy and for Men's Health, some pretty big magazines, and kept me very busy doing that. But at a certain point, when I was working at Men's Health magazine, I got to realize that I was just like spending all day long talking and writing and editing. I mean, it's nice that someone paid me to do that, but it was also exhausting. And I was looking for a pastime that I could do that would just shut me up. And I found an adult ed drawing class in the town where I was living in eastern Pennsylvania at the time. And I realized when I walked into that class that I would sit down, and for the next 2 or 3 hours, however long the class lasted, I would just shut up and draw. And what I realized was what a valuable skill that could be to me, because I'm also my whole life long, from when I was a little kid to now, I've been a very eager traveler. But I think that my traveling tended to be more about like the bustle and go of travel, get to the next destination, check the next box, see the next thing. And I was fortunate enough, one time I was traveling with my sister-in-law, who was an artist. And she sat down in a picturesque little square in San Antonio, Texas, and whipped out, her watercolors and did this beautiful tiny drawing of the square where we were sitting. And I thought, that is where I need to be. So I started diverting my drawing skills into watercolors, and also just finding time to sit and just experience where I am, to really look at it deeply. And I find that when I have a pencil in my hand, that's what I do, as opposed to, as a hiker, you're always trying to get to the summit or climb the next peak, or, have you climbed all the 14ers in Colorado or the 4,000 footers in New England? All that purpose-based travel. I mean, there are things to recommend it for sure, because it means you get out a lot and you see a lot of things. But there's also something beautiful about just sitting there and looking. And I find that that drawing and watercolors are one of the things that really just make me sit and look.
I love that you say that, because back in 2022, I did a walk across Ireland, and I walked Ireland's National Famine Way. I took the route that many people who had to leave Ireland took to get on the boats and head to Australia, England, of course, the United States. And because I have this channel where I do the podcast and I also do some vlogging, I set about trying to create videos while I was hiking. And what it did was, instead of just looking at this amazing view that I had in this small town or on this mountain, instead of just looking at it, it forced me to stop, take off my bag, put it down for 5 minutes, and get that shot, and to make sure I captured it on video, because I wanted it to be part of this experience that I brought back with me. And I can imagine that when you're out hiking and you see a beautiful sunset, or you just catch something that you've never seen before, you just know instinctively, I'm not just going to keep going. I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to capture this. And when it's illustrations, probably sitting there for quite a bit of time, you're probably really ingratiating yourself into that scene.
Yeah, I wrote an article for backpacker.com a year ago, in which the headline was, "This is the best 0.2 ounce addition to your hiking kit." Naturally in Backpacker, they're all about, fast packing and being as light as possible. And it's exactly what you said. If you bring a pencil along and a piece of paper, it gives you a reason to just stop and really look. And, you mentioned beautiful vistas, beautiful sunsets. I'm as fascinated by how a pine cone is constructed as I am with the Continental Divide chain of mountains that I can, see from Estes Park in Colorado. So I'm as likely to draw something tiny as I am to draw something expansive, and they're both great.
And I find that when you do slow it down, when you're not trying to get from point A to point B, that's not always the goal. You end up having to talk to more local people. You end up having more conversations along the way. And the more that you talk to the actual people, the more you experience these places, more than just getting a picture of the Eiffel Tower. I can imagine that thousands and thousands of visitors to Paris have a picture of the Eiffel Tower on their phone. But if you sit down and you start sketching the Eiffel Tower, or a pine cone that you see on the ground in the park outside the Eiffel Tower, you're going to end up interacting more with the people who are there. And it's not just going to be a boom, there's my shot, I can put that on Instagram, now I'm heading to the Louvre.
Yeah, for more Instagram worthy artwork, like me and the Mona Lisa, here I am, click. Like, who cares? It is all about who you can connect with on the road. And really, it's fascinating to me to see how, if I'm sitting there with my sketchbook and my pencil in hand, people are just riveted by it. I see them gravitating around me, looking over my shoulder to see what I'm up to there. And it's like, yeah, like they're starting to look through my eyes at how I capture a scene. And I think maybe it wakens something up in them. A lot of people, talk themselves down. Oh, I'm not an artist. I can't do that. That's exactly what I thought before I started actually doing it. And one of my early drawing instructors told me, a lot of the impediment that people have to doing artwork is that they talk themselves out of it. They say, oh, I can't possibly do that. What they need to do is just shut up and do the work. And it's not going to be perfect. I'm not a perfect artist. I'm not Michelangelo. Really, I wouldn't want to lie on my back and paint the Sistine Chapel anyway. But it's not about the quality of what you do. It's about the quality of the attention that you pay when you have a pencil in your hand and you're writing it down, or a video camera, or even just, I'm fascinated by your trip because it seems like in the back of your mind, there's also the whole history of Ireland and the potato famine and the migrations that set off around the world. If you've got that stuff running in your mind, it's just going to be a deeper experience that you have of where you are, rather than, okay, I've seen the Eiffel Tower, I can move on now.
Yeah, it is something that I do have a passion about, talking about actually not just hitting the sites and making sure that you're finding a way to meet the people in the area, see what real people see, because I have relatives who have also gone back to Ireland because they wanted to see it, and they kissed the Blarney Stone and might have seen a hurling match at Croke Park, but what they didn't do is talk to the people. So now when they see news stories coming out of Ireland, like, a lot of them surprise them because they're interested to see how people in Ireland view certain issues or whatever. And I'm like, no, like, if you would have been there, and if you would have been in the small towns, like, you would have known a lot of these things. And I don't think anybody's right or wrong, but it's just the way that I like to travel, is to make sure that I have a better grasp of the place I visited because I was there. And I want to know sometimes that because you sat down and you did sketch something, or you captured something with your pencil and your paper, that you had an experience, whether it be on the trail or just in a big city, where you had an experience that you wouldn't have had if you didn't try to capture that image.
Absolutely. I feel that deeply. And I'm so grateful that I made that turn at the point in my life that I did. But before I realized, yes, I am an artist, before I realized that, I could have that same experience with a beer in my hand sitting at the bar as I did, out in some beautiful mountain vista. If you sit down in a bar and you've got, your lovely crafted beer in Ireland or England, because they do it better there than anywhere else, although it's pretty good here in Fort Collins where I live too. If if you sit down with a beer in hand, or it happens to me in ballparks all the time too, where you get to talking with the people around you. We're all just in such a hurry now to get on to the next thing and to make the next meal or make the next Instagram post or whatever. If you can just discipline yourself to sit down, tell the bartender you want a beer, and just see what develops around you. That's where the relationships develop. That's where the history develops. People are always asking you, oh, you're a Yank, eh? Where are your people from? And, half the time people hate me because I'm a Stuart. But it does conjure up all of this history that, it isn't necessarily a beautiful history. It's not pretty, all that murder and mayhem going on. On the other hand, it's something that we all share. We all come from somewhere. We all have a background. And, the degree to which we can share that background and not murder each other, I think that's a positive.
When you talk about getting out on the trails, and when we're talking about hiking, it is a type of travel that is not like other ones, because you do have to prepare for it in different ways than just going to a theme park. I mean, a lot of people make the mistake of going to the theme parks and not preparing physically for them as well. But I do think that it is a different type of training. And when you're testing yourself and you're setting these goals, and then it makes the trip even more of an event, I feel, because you have your training plan, and then you have to come up with your meal plan. You have to come up with making sure, like you mentioned earlier, that your pack's light enough, that you're only taking the things that you absolutely need. Then by the time you finally have done it, it was something that you've been preparing for such a long time that I feel it has a little bit more meaning to it.
It's so interesting that you bring up that subject, because I just published a piece in Backpacker called "Is Death a Good Hiking Buddy?" And the surprising answer there is, yeah, it's a great hiking buddy. If you are planning a hike, as I did a couple of years ago, I live in on the Front Range in Colorado, which means that Long's Peak is hovering on the horizon to the west. Every time I look over there, and it's a 14,000 footer. Has a bit of a reputation in Colorado as being a place where unprepared people go to die. But because I look at it all the time, I really wanted to go up there. But I also knew its reputation. I knew what trouble people got into climbing Long's Peak. It's a class 3 hike, which means that there's a lot of hand over hand scrambling to get up it. It's not a roped climb, but it's pretty easy to die on Long's Peak if you're not careful. And that was the whole thesis of my piece was, if you're planning a trip where there's a real threat to your life, that means you're going to approach it in a very different way than you would just a Sunday walk in the park. So I recruited 3 friends to go climb Longs with me, all of them experienced hikers, all of them in good shape, all of them knowing their way around the mountains. I spent a long time watching videos of people who had actually climbed Long's Peak, so that I knew in advance where the very difficult parts were, the most dangerous. And I just prepared in general in a way that I wouldn't if I was just running up some random peak here in Colorado. And as you can see, I made it through the hike. We did have some very dangerous times. There was one giant boulder that my friends had to pull me up. After which I gave them a hug on top of this big rock and said, "You guys are my brothers for life," and they are, because they helped me through that point. But it's not only if you have if you're planning a trip that has some risk to it, you approach the trip with your training and how you pull your gear together, like you were saying, in a different way. But you also remember it in a different way. I don't know if you're aware of the idea of something called a flashbulb memory. It's the kind of thing that, for a person my age, remembering where I was when I found out that John F. Kennedy had been shot. Flashbulb memories come when your mind is under stress and it's trying to record all the details of this dangerous thing that you're doing. Because if you make it out alive, then you may have to replay those steps again to get you out of a similar dilemma. So my trip up Long's Peak, I was planning it for about 6 months, executed it over the course of 3 days, came back, and then, over beers, my buddies and I were sitting, like, looking at Long's Peak, reliving the memory of it. And it's all so vivid to me. I'm getting goosebumps right now, even talking about it, because it was such an awesome experience. And it brought me so close to these guys who I hiked it with. It was just an amazing trip in every way. And I didn't sketch once while I was there because I didn't want to drop my pencil off a cliff.
So you picked that particular peak because you see it every day and you know the challenge and you wanted to rise to that challenge. How do you pick some of your other travel excursions? How do you pick some of your favorite hikes or other travel endeavors? Because I think a lot of people will look at the earth is your blank canvas and you can go anywhere at a certain point or almost anywhere. And you do have to narrow it down, because death may be a great hiking companion, death is also going to cut short your plans of being able to do everything that you want. So how do you decide, like, this is the place that I gotta see? I have to experience this. I want to get out in nature in this area.
Yeah, I'm a big reader. So another article I wrote for Backpacker was an article called "The 50 Best Hiking, Tramping, Walking Books of All Time." And when I work on an article like that, I'm coming up with the book titles that make sense to be in there because they are indeed great literature. But I'm also adding to my mental to-do list when I read a book like that. Um, there's a writer named Patrick Leigh Fermor. He's a British man who took a trip. He essentially walked along the Danube all the way from Holland, where the Danube begins, down to, I think the Danube flows into the Black Sea. Anyway, your geographical expert watchers will be critiquing me here. But when I read that book for the Backpacker article, it also planted a seed that I'd never been to the Danube. I'd been all over Europe, but I'd never been on the Danube. So based on reading Patrick Leigh Fermor's writing, I asked my wife, you want to go take a cruise on the Danube? And she agreed. So last fall, we spent 12 days. So we started in Vienna and finished up in Istanbul. And I saw a whole part of the world that I'd never been to before. And really, my pathway into that was a writer who was alive before World War II. But he gave me my window into something that I knew was going to be a great experience. And you know what? It was.
When you talk about having an experience that is, life-threatening, that is, you're really putting yourself out there and you're saying, like, I can't mess up the training. I can't mess up how much I have in my pack, because if I carry too much and I can't take it, that's going to have serious ramifications. So when you're planning a more serious trip like that, is it a different energy than when you're planning a trip because you want to see Vienna or the Danube? Or are you looking at it sort of the same way? Like, there are things that I want to make sure that I accomplish, and there are things that I need to bring, and I have to pack light. Is it the same type of preparation, or is it different?
You know what? If I've learned anything over a lifetime of hiking, you could die on any stupid little hike if you don't prepare in the right way. Especially here in the Rockies, you can above timberline, you can get in a snowstorm in July. There's measurable snow every month of the year in Rocky Mountain National Park. So I respect the outdoors. I know that I'm not immortal. I'm just a pasty old guy. I stay in good shape because I want to be able to have my adventures, but I'm under no illusions that I'm immortal. So I would say that, prepping for a hike, even if it's just a little day hike, is, it's part of the fun of doing it. It's like there's a little peak just to the north of Long's Peak called Estes Cone, and I've climbed it a few times. It has a pointy little top on it where you could get into a lot of trouble if you weren't careful. And I approached that hike as seriously as I approached Long's, meaning reading up on it in advance, getting the trail intel, people who have been on the trail recently and can tell me if it's washed out anywhere, if there are any ambiguous social trails leading off that could get you into trouble. I always make sure that I bring survival gear with me. I don't want to overdo it on a day hike, but it's always in the back of my mind that it's possible I could get lost. I could get hurt. I could have to spend a night out. Do I have enough warm clothes to help get me through there? Do I have the communications gear that I'll need to call for help if I need that? Am I wearing the right shoes? Is my clothing neither too light nor too heavy? Because you can get in trouble by being overheated as well. Like, all these things are part of my what I build into preparation for any trip. whether I'm going to be floating the Danube or climbing Long's Peak. And that's part of the fun of the trip, though, is I have this goal. I know what I need to do to accomplish it. Now, what steps am I going to take to make sure that I accomplish the goal and have the most fun possible? This isn't a grim thing. It's about being out and experiencing the most life you can in the best possible way. And that does not include plunging off of a cliff.
What is your training regimen like? Is it more of smaller hikes to get ready for the bigger hikes? Or do you have to, just like any other athlete, do you have to hit the gym, hit the treadmill, do a lot of weightlifting? Or do you sort of play your way into shape? Do you get into that hiking shape just by hiking?
The answer to your question is yes, and both. When I was climbing Longs, I took a bunch of, I climbed some other 14ers in Colorado, less challenging ones, so that I knew that I could handle both the distance and the altitude. But I was an editor at Men's Health magazine for 20 years, and so I did a lot of gym workouts there. I still am in the gym 3 days a week. It's a mix of cardio, weights, body weight exercises, resistance exercises, all that stuff, because I want to maintain a certain level of fitness. So whatever challenge comes up, I'll be up for it. But also, I want to have as many days as possible. And, fitness isn't a guarantee that you're going to, live to 100 and, still be climbing 14ers in Colorado. But it can extend your warranty quite a long time and make sure that you're still out doing the cool stuff you want to do. So fitness for me isn't a drudge. It's not a responsibility. I consider it, it kind of qualifies me to live the life I want to. And, I find ways to get through my hour-long workouts without being too bored, changing up the exercises, listening to books on tape and podcasts, anything that I can do to keep my mind active while I'm, doing the reps.
So you were a columnist and then you became a cartoonist. So when you developed this other skill and you learned how to become a cartoonist, do you find it also helped you become a better writer, a better columnist?
It's one of the things I love about doing it. So I'm on Substack now. I've been on there for 4 years. It's petermoore.substack.com if people watching this want to take a look. But that's really where I began coordinating my words and my drawings at the same time. And what I realized was that the drawings that I do and the cartoons that I do often are commenting on the writing that I'm doing. So the cartoons have a different function in my Substack than the writing does. But when I'm doing it right, they work harmoniously to give a perspective outside myself to comment on the experiences that Peter, the writer, is having and explaining on my Substack. So it's been really popular. I mean, I started with 0 readers, as everyone does on Substack, and now this morning I'm almost at 11,000 subscribers, which is a lot of folks to be communicating with. And honestly, when I was at Playboy or at Men's Health, the work I've done for Backpacker, I get a ton more feedback and connection with my readers and my subscribers on Substack than I ever did, even with these giant magazines that I work for. So I'm so glad that the technology has progressed to the point where Substack exists and people can find me at petermoore.substack.com.
That is incredible. Now, I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning of the interview. You said that you were living in Eastern Pennsylvania when you started to learn how to be a cartoonist, when you started taking those classes. As somebody who was born and raised in Eastern Pennsylvania, I was wondering where that was, maybe even the school district where you took that course.
I was in, Emmaus, Pennsylvania, which is right near Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. That was the home of Rodale Inc., which was the publishing company I was working for. So, and I was it was the East Penn School District, the adult ed program there. And they had it was like an art sampler. And I did a bunch of different things. Yeah, tried acrylic painting, tried watercolor, tried drawing, and I found out that I love them all, and it has just completely changed my life. That one adult ed course, I need to go back and look up that teacher and thank her for what she did for me.
Do you still keep up with the other art forms? Do you still do acrylic painting, oil painting, and things like that?
Wait a second, Rick. I need to know where in Eastern PA are you from?
I'm from Lancaster, so about an hour and a
Ah,
half away from
I
that.
love Lancaster. We used to go down to Amish country all the time. Yeah, I'm a big one for I'm a big dumpling guy. So yeah, that's that's going to be good in Lancaster. Um, so yeah, I mean, so a couple of years ago, um, I got introduced to a drawing program called Procreate, which is a very weird name. Yes, I agree for a drawing program, but it comes out of New Zealand, and I find that for the last couple of years, I've really been focusing on doing my artwork digitally because it's the easiest way to share it, and it's a way that like my office used to be like covered with erasure, like from my eraser when I was like scrubbing things out, and I would emerge from a day of work covered with paint, and my wife would shoo me into the shower before she would sit down to have dinner with me. Um, when you're working digitally, it's all just pixels, man. And I never get paint on myself. It's easy to erase things. I found that I can be an animator now, in addition to doing pencil sketches, but also things that look like acrylics, things that look like watercolors on with my Procreate program. It's been terrific for me, and it has also been a pathway for me to get into a lot of different kinds of publication because people are looking for digital artwork now. And I taught myself how to do it, which I'm so grateful to have that skill.
This has been an amazing conversation. I know that you plugged your Substack. If there's anything else that you want to let our listeners know exists from you, if there's any place you want to direct them, why don't you do it now? Because we're going to be running out of time in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, everything that I do eventually makes it onto Substack. So if they go to petermoore.substack.com and click on a few of the posts that I've done there, they'll very quickly know whether or not they dig what I do. And they can either subscribe or go their own way. But the fact is, it just makes me happy to do it. That's why I do it. It satisfies something deep within me. And it's just so gratifying that there are 11,000 other people out there who like what I do too.
The old quote, I guess it's attributed to Mark Twain, that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I find that to be completely and totally false, because I think that if you love what you do, you're actually going to work harder, and make it doesn't make you any less frustrated. It doesn't mean that on a random Thursday, you're not still going to, you could be the third baseman for the Cubs, whatever your dream job is. And some days you're going to go into work and you're not going to want to do it. But I think that when you do love what you're doing, you'll do it even if you're already set for life. You're just going to keep doing it because you have that passion to get it done. And maybe you'll take off the random Thursday if you don't need the money, but it is something that it's great to see you continuing to do all of these great things, writing about all these different experiences, capturing them in different ways as a cartoonist. So this is a really great conversation, Peter, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it was great to be here. Thanks for having me, Rick. I appreciate it.
That was Peter Moore, and this has been episode 219 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. When we return next Thursday, I'll be getting back into the world of theme parks. My co-host Sarah Says was one of the first people to get the chance to experience Disney California Adventure when it opened originally, and we're going to talk about how different that park looked when it opened to the public for the first time and how it looks now. That will be next week on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.